All right, and welcome back to the Gulf Coast Growth Show. I'm your host, Jason Lee. Co-host Clint Haken is anxiously awaiting our arrival to get back into our studio. We did a lot of great work with Shell, some of our partners, to put together a phenomenal studio down there in Deer Park, and I think we're getting pretty close to getting our guests back in there. So we're excited about that. And I am here today with Mike Middleton and George Booth from SecureGlobal Logistics. In just a second, I'm going to let them introduce themselves, tell you a little bit about their background, but I'm really excited today. Normally, we're talking to people who are whether in a service organization or out there driving legislation or out there at the really the end user level in some of the plants and some of the higher ends. But today, we're fortunate enough to have guys that are in the trenches in the logistics space and that are dealing with the day in and the day out of what's going on when it comes to trade here in the U.S. and across our ship channel in the port region and the work that's taking place. So excited to have that with Mike and George. So we're going to tackle three topics today. Really, what has happened? You know, we read about in the news. We kind of forget where things come from, right? I'm looking at the drinks that I have on my table and all the stuff that I have. I'm looking at my mask, right? I'm sure it came from somewhere, and all of these things are being produced and coming in and out of Houston from somewhere. And there's guys like these guys behind the scenes that are making it happen. So we're going to get a little peek inside of that, look at the last 90 days of what's taking place in trade and logistics, look at where we are today, and then maybe even share and some insider, and I don't want to say insider information, but really an inside look at what maybe the next 90 days to 6 months looks like. So again, gentlemen, thank you for joining me. As we dive in, Mike, I'll let you kick it off. As the CEO, you can tell us a little bit about your background before George does, and then we'll talk about the last 90 days. Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, thanks, Jason. We appreciate you having us on the program today.
Glad to have you.
So just to give you a bit of a background, I've spent the last 21 years here at SecureGlobal Logistics in Houston. I had a 20-year career prior to that in broadcasting, not on this video side, because I don't have a face for television. But I had a pretty decent voice for radio, and I spent 20 years in radio broadcasting before getting into logistics. It was quite a pivot, but it was related to a company business. My father founded our company in 1997. I joined him in 1999. And since then, we've just been building this company and serving customers here in the Gulf Coast area, helping them move product all over the world to and from this area and to and from various points on the globe, doing it with a high-touch, white-glove kind of service. So whether it's imports, exports, packing, crating, warehousing, inventory, air freight, sea freight, road freight, rail, barge, we back of a donkey, if there's a way to move freight, we figured out how to do it.
Great, that's awesome. Well, fantastic. And George, we were talking a little bit earlier, probably one of the most unique guys I've ever met from East Texas. Why don't you tell us a little bit about your background, what brought you to the company, and some of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, thanks for having us on, Jason. It's good to be here. As you can tell, my accent, I'm not from here. Grew up in the northeast of Scotland in a little fishing village, and then moved to the big smoke of Aberdeen, which is really a mini Houston as regards oil and gas. All the majors you see here, all the large service companies have facilities in Aberdeen. So found my way into the logistics industry in 1994, started in operations and then moved into sales and business development, and then became a main board director of an international freight forwarding company that moved me here to Houston in 2010. And left that company in 2015, but kept my hand in and started working alongside Mike just in a consulting relationship, and then joined the SecureGlobal team last April. Again, like Texas, I never got here straight away, but I got to SGL as soon as I could. It's a
I love it. And so a big part of our topics and a lot of the work that goes on in this show is trying to educate really those individuals and those stakeholders about really the complexity and the beauty of all that takes place. We have one of the most dynamic regions for trade in the world, right? That comes in and out of this local port. And over the last 90 days, 120 days, it's gotten it, its head flipped upside down. Right? Everything in the world has just shifted. And so let's take a moment to talk a little bit about that. So Mike, you've been in it 23 years. Tell us about what the landscape looks like. It's 90 days. we just kind of have a melting pot of things that are just not normal. Share with that so our audience understands really the dynamic of what's happening in trade.
Sure. So our business really encompasses a number of different facets. So we have an import side, which would mean any cargo coming into the U.S. from anywhere in the world. Export side, cargo moving out of Houston, the USA, to other points in the world. We have a domestic component here inside the United States. So, we have various pieces of our business that have been impacted differently as COVID has emerged. So I first started hearing about the impact of COVID from my agents in Asia, back in January as it began to rear its head there. And my Chinese partners began to tell us, look, this is really taking over. It's taking over our hospitals, taking over our healthcare system. It's beginning to create shutdowns. We're beginning to experience lock-ins. So long before it came to the U.S., we began to get a feel for this from our partners overseas, primarily in China and other parts of Asia, as it began to emerge. And as it began to impact their business, I very quickly understood, look, this is a pandemic. It is going to spread, and it's eventually going to make its way to us. And I think it was sometime then in February when I reached out to George and our leadership team and said, guys, we need to start preparing for what's coming our way. We need to be prepared to work from home. We need to be prepared to have remote capabilities for all of our teams. So let's start putting those plans in place now, because we saw the wave emerging in Asia and coming our way. And certainly that's what transpired over the ensuing few months. And so what you saw in Asia to begin with was a shutdown of services. When people get locked in at home, they just can't move product the way that they did previously. Manufacturing stops, and the moment manufacturing stops, what do the transporters have to do? At that moment, they get shut down as well. And so we saw that emerging in Asia very early on. George, I'm not sure what you might want to add to that, but that was sort of the beginning of it as we saw that emerge in Asia.
Yeah, definitely. I think the connected network, we are in a unique position that we're getting. We're waking up in the morning to emails and correspondence from China, from Singapore, from around the world, and then Italy as well, another manufacturing base for the oil fields. So we were getting those messages. Mike was very quick in the uptake and helped us be ready. We were already on the cloud, so we just had to really check with our staff to make sure they had internet capabilities at home and any hardware that they needed to switch over. But it definitely was a very unique dynamic for the first time in my career, 25 years in this industry. And we saw the fuel price drop with the oil price dropping out, fuel going down, but freight rates exponentially skyrocketing. So for air freight, we saw up to 10 times a kilo rate. So where ordinarily you'd be paying $2-3 a kilo on certain trade lanes, it was up to as much as $19-20 a kilo. So it was a very challenging conversation to have with shippers, particularly in Houston, oil and gas service companies and operators, to say to them, you're not only getting less for your product, but you have to pay more to move it. And that's the first time in my career that there's been an indirect correlation between fuel price and freight charges. So that's added to the challenging dynamic of what we've been seeing. On top of that, we saw a lot of, when China shut down, we saw a lot of liner-owned equipment, containers and flat racks, specialized equipment was stuck in China. So for exports from the US, there was a shortage of shipping containers and shipping liner equipment. So we had the price again went up. So it's been a very challenging commercial dynamic during all this.
So as these manufacturing companies were shut down in China, what happened is the airlines took obviously flights out of rotation. Same with the carriers, the ocean carriers. They just took equipment out of rotation. So sailings that you would normally have, flights that you would normally have, they just reduced that capacity dramatically. And in the absence of capacity, prices obviously increase. That's what drove the pricing up, was the lack of capacity. And so, we began to experience that, as George said, to tripling, quadrupling of prices for air freight and sea freight, simply because the capacity went away as those carriers took flights and took those vessels out of rotation.
And so for those that are, watching this and trying to get their mind wrapped around it, I think it's really critical to understand what's happening is when we in the U.S. are making products and all those things are getting done, especially down there in the refineries and things are getting produced, and then back out to the consumer, there's always there's a middleman, right? And there's an exchange between those things and stuff going out and stuff coming in. So what I'm hearing is for that producer who is usually reliant on the higher value of the barrel, the higher value of the oil to then return profits. In exchange, they're getting less on their end, but they're paying more for the stuff that they need to try to go to work with, which is a dangerous equation, right? So I think, and then
Absolutely.
correct me if I'm wrong, how that trickles down to the middleman or the guys in your places, margins shrink, right? Because you have lesser options and your costs are higher and, fewer ways to get the job done. So everything really becomes a trickle down effect from an economic perspective.
Well, it would have been nice if the higher prices charged by the carriers were something that we could have benefited from. But, the pain point for our customers was so high for them to bear these additional costs that in many cases they were squeezing us on our margin even further because they were already having to pay more to the carriers themselves, the steamship lines and the airlines. And so it wasn't something that we could personally benefit from as much as we would have liked to, but it was just a big pain point for our customers that we had to help them endure.
Yeah, and I think that's again the intent and the idea behind bringing on people in the trenches. It allows people to understand from a high level down to the private business owner, the people that we serve, which are gentlemen like yourselves, your organizations. There's pain felt everywhere, and then even down to the consumer. I remember helping explain to a gentleman who was frustrated because his mask, they were at the dentist office, they were charging a premium for a mask when they came in. They said, we have to now charge a mask fee. And he's like, I can't believe this. We're just trying to get on my feet. And these guys are trying to charge a mask fee. I said, hey, man, if you like your dentist, understand he's trying to stay in business. That mask that used to cost him 42 cents cost him $4.42 now, and he gets to see half as many patients because of space rules. And
that's right.
So let's be clear. There's an absolute trickle down effect from an economic perspective when you have those dynamics. Now, in the world that you deal with, we're talking about multiple countries, price change, logistic problems. You just described ships just not going out, containers stuck somewhere. So you're used to seeing, a million go out, a million come back. Well, now you got a million go out and 300 come back. What do you do? How do you figure that stuff out? So,
well, exactly. And it's because this is shifting all over the world. Mm-hmm. The experience that we had in Asia 3 months ago, you're now experiencing in Brazil and Latin America now because it's just hitting that region. So as this pandemic moves around the world, the dynamics are shifting with it as well.
Wow. And so do you guys, tell me a little bit about what happens and how you guys, or how do you stay abreast of the situation that's going on locally? So I know that there's a lot of different trade things and stuff taking place from a regional perspective. I mean, is it just industry common knowledge that you guys are in tune to, or how do you stay connected to what's taking place here in our own backyard and how it's going to impact you as you go out into the marketplace across other nations?
Yeah, I mean,
George, you want to take a stab?
Yeah, obviously we're following state and national directives as far as what we can do and how much we can be open, how much contact we can have. But we do, I mean, Mike and I and our leadership team are highly networked. So we're talking to a lot of people, even non-customers. Last night I sat for a couple of hours with an operator who's not a customer, but just picked his brains about what they're seeing, a deep water offshore Gulf of Mexico operator. So we're just learning and listening as much as we can and gathering as much information as we can about the market dynamics and the changing picture. I mean, that's another thing that we're dealing with. Now, no names mentioned about last night, but that company probably won't exist 2 months from now. And it's the changing operator landscape and service company landscape is something that we're all going to have to deal with. I think some big oil field household names will disappear or change ownership or go through Chapter 11 or Chapter 22 if it's their second time. So we're watching that very closely as well. We're seeing going concern alerts going into the SEC from large publicly traded companies. I think we're going to see a lot of consolidation and changes there as well. So as well as at a very personal level, the changes of some of your key contacts within your customer base. So we get an email and just out of office reply saying this person is no longer with the company. So as you can, if anyone who spends any time on LinkedIn can tell, there's a lot of people losing their jobs, and that's one of the saddest, the human element of all this. And we don't not pick up the phone when someone calls us when they're no longer a customer. And Mike and I both spend a lot of time talking to people who are between jobs or facing a change of career because of what we've seen in the last few months. And that's a double whammy. You're having to help people find something else, but you're also losing that contact that you've cultivated within an organization. So maybe your key sponsor for a contract. So
absolutely. And so, guys, one thing you just hit on, and I want to make sure I highlight that, is just last week they had the organization Economic Alliance had a industrial procurement forum, which was centered around those contractual relationships and how those dynamics will change in here on the petrochem and refinery side. So I think you just hit on a big nail on the head. It's really critical from a relational perspective to really nurture those relationships and sustain those and stay in tune, whether it be the organizations or your connections, because as the dynamics change, you can, if you're going to fly at a high level and not, this is the time when you got to come out of the office and you got to get down in there with your peers, the folks that are doing that, get part of the scuttlebutt, right? The stuff that's taking place behind the scenes, because that's where you're going to get the information that you need to go do the work. And so we're real proud because of the capacity or the ability to take these guys out from behind the gates here down south, or even in the port region, in the port, and bring them and make them accessible to people so they can get answers to the dynamics and things that are changing. Know who you need to contact is a really critical component, and then work with your peers. Let's talk a little bit about what's changed. So we knew that the world got flipped upside down. Things were shutting down. Now they're opening. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing today and maybe what you think. Mike, we'll let you go first, but what are you seeing happening now? And then where do you think it's going?
Sure. So, we're coming off a number of challenges, right? So last year, something we haven't touched on is the fact that we had all these tariffs that had been implemented last year on product coming in out of China. And so many of our customers had to readjust their pricing and their cost perspective on the goods that they were acquiring out of China and reselling here in the US, because they had 25, 50, 55% tariffs that had been accumulated over the course of the year on their goods that they were reselling in the US. So they were already in some ways having to recalibrate based on increased costs of goods because of these tariffs that hit. So you had that, then you had COVID hit, and then here particularly for our area, you had the price of oil drop down to almost $20 a barrel. That's three really major hits to this economy that in a very short period of time that people had to react to. And so what you're seeing today, I think, really is a big recalibration of companies to whatever this is going to look like now and what it could potentially look like in the future. We only know what it looks like now. No one has a crystal ball. Well, we've talked about a V-shaped recovery, whether it is V-shaped or U-shaped, I can't really predict. I do think that today where we are is that we are beginning to see more traffic. We are beginning to see more bookings. We are beginning to see more pressure on trucking. We're beginning to see intermodal begin to happen a bit more than what we'd seen in the last few months. Intermodal being the rail part of the ocean side. Bookings are up on air freight. We saw a pretty substantial increase in bookings on air freight in the month of May across the board, not necessarily in our company, but across the board. So as of today, we are seeing the effects of the uptick, both on ocean rates, on air freight. Now, air freight volumes are coming up, but air freight rates are moderating. So whereas, as George was saying, you might have been seeing $17 a kilo, $19 a kilo for some air freight, those rates are moderating as the volumes and as capacity and as aircraft begin to become more available with greater rotations. So I think we're seeing some moderating of pricing. We're seeing some increase in capacity and service, and we are seeing some growth in booking.
Great. That's great news. George, anything you got to say?
Yeah, what we saw is some of our clients were predicting about a 15% reduction in international, and up to 60% in domestic. And I think that was reflected in the oil price. Internationally and offshore deep water tends to run off the Brent crude oil price, which dropped significantly, but the bottom didn't fall out of it quite like the domestic WTI pricing. So as WTI and plus domestic can be shut off a lot quicker than offshore. So our clients who are tied to the oil and gas industry and can't diversify, the closest they could do was to put their focus on the international and the deep water stuff. So that meant there's more exports happening than there are imports, and more international activity than there is domestic activity. So that was happening. Of course, the WTI is now caught back up with Brent, and we see some of the big operators who BP this week announced 10,000 job losses. So that's almost flipping again. So, I mean, during all this, we were having daily management calls and just taking the picture on a day-by-day basis. And I think a lot of great analysts never saw this coming, and they don't see where it's going. So Mike and I, running a privately held logistics company, aren't going to be so arrogant as to think that we can have it all. But we will talk to as many people as we can and try and pull together a picture and plan as best we can going into the future. But it is we've never seen these dynamics before. We've never seen the picture change so quickly and pivot so quickly. So we have to, one of the benefits of being privately held is we are a nimble company. Our customers and our staff have access to ownership and leadership, so we can make quick decisions and pivot quickly. But that's part of what we have to do. It's not saying where we're going. It's being able to react when the market react and respond appropriately when the market takes us there. So.
And there's a portion of the logistics sector that has benefited from this. Obviously, the e-commerce side and those that support e-commerce have seen dramatic growth in their services over the last few months. You know, Amazon has benefited from everyone being locked in and all of the e-retailers. So there's a portion in logistics that serves that e-commerce business that has done quite well. Companies that serve traditional freight type business saw it soften up for them, but certainly that e-commerce side has benefited dramatically. I think for companies like ours, in terms of what we see where things are going, and that was your question also, is where do you see things going? We're proposing more and more to companies that we assume the responsibility for warehousing and inventory of their product. And as companies seek to lean down and reduce costs, they're questioning why they should pay for a warehouse, why they should pay for a logistics team and a warehouse staff. And so they're looking to more of a 3PL model where they outsource those services to companies like ours who are well equipped to do it, have the facilities in place, the know-how, the software, the training, the capability to assume those services on behalf of companies where they don't have to take down a big warehouse footprint. They don't have to invest in a warehouse and the costs that go along with staffing and workers' compensation costs and all of that sort of thing. And so we're seeing an uptick in requests for us to actually manage the warehousing and inventory piece for our clients. And I think that will continue to grow.
Yeah, I think more people, and one of the things that I've seen is this lean model of how you this is usually when people wake up and 10 years over a bull market, POs through the roof, oil prices through the roof. So everything was just humming. And sometimes it's easy to go, look at your P&L and say, we're good. Sometimes you get these moments. This is one of those moments. I think the beauty and the story of this capitalistic American society that we live in is that we find a way to get it done. We figure out a way to do it, and then usually there's some creative ways that then come from it that go and expand. And for those entrepreneurial people like yourselves that are able to pivot and look for new ways, that really is the story of our region, right? It's that that Houston strong, finding a way, pulling things together, getting stuff done, and then ultimately getting on the other side of this thing with some success. It will require change, but we're change agents. That's where it comes from. So.
Yeah. One thing you hear in the oil patch all the time is, give me just one more good run up and I'll learn from it. I'll learn from the past. And I think sometimes we do and sometimes we don't. When things are really good, it's exactly what you said. People have a tendency to not fuss over the details quite as much as they do during these downtimes like this. Ultimately, this makes you leaner and stronger. It makes you a better business person to go through times like these. It may not be fun to experience, but the education you get from it and the way it can sharpen and hone you as a business and as an individual can be very good.
Absolutely.
I think it's worth noting as well, as we all know, that this didn't just come in the back of a bullish time for the oil and gas market. We've been in a pretty much deflated market since 2015. So we saw a lot of customers already cut fat during that time, and now they're cutting muscle. And that's when there are opportunities for companies like us to come in and provide the muscle. You can outsource muscle. But that's one of the challenges of this market, is it came on not in the back of great years for a lot of companies, and they're already highly leveraged, which we're seeing. So that's bringing all the challenges now in insolvency, sort of events happening. So, but there are opportunities there for companies to come in and provide the muscle that companies don't want to carry on their payroll. So, and I think that might be part of what we're seeing in the markets as well, that the economy or the markets at large are booming at this time, but they respond to quarterly results, and they respond to companies cutting quickly and trimming their costs aggressively. But at the other side of that, there's a very human cost to that, and people losing their jobs and losing opportunities at a time when there's really not a lot out there for them. So there's a lot going on.
Yeah, I've always, the human component is always the most difficult component, and there's no way to express the magnitude of that, right? So it's easy to talk numbers and business and think that way, but yeah, 100%. We're definitely concerned about those folks that have lost opportunities. But I love what you just shared about what you were saying about the ability for the small business owner to step in and get creative. I've got another guy I'm pursuing for the show. They've had to shift their manufacturing business, but they've been able to pivot to some PPE work. You see some of these distributors or distilleries turning into hand sanitizer places. So it's really a great story. And even hearing you gentlemen, Mike, that's why I approached you, because you've got a great business acumen that I can see from your social media presence. But the ability to lead from the front and create opportunities is the story that I think makes the region great, makes you guys like yourselves great, makes this area great, because we will get back, right? We will recover. We will get back on track. Those things will happen. And we always seem to find a way to do it. And so I think you guys shared some great insight to the day in the life and the work. I know you guys probably maybe put in a little more than the normal 40 in the last 90 days, 40 per week, maybe a little bit. So,
when you own a business, you don't ever get away from it. It's 24 hours a day. So yeah, I've got a few more gray hairs as a result of the last 90 days. I can tell you that for sure.
Yeah, I tell you, I'm bald in the back. So I always said I'm a party in the front, pandemic in the back. Nobody's allowed to show up.
Well, I'm losing it back there, and my dad said it was because he pulled a hair for every mistake I ever made.
George made a lot of mistakes. So
hey, God only puts marble on his best furniture, guys.
Well, gentlemen, I have enjoyed chatting with you today. Mike, I'll let you real quick. If anybody has any questions regarding any of the stuff that you talked about today, what's the best way for them to reach out, contact you?
Yeah, my email is mike.middleton, and that's spelled Middleton, just like it sounds. Mike.middleton@securegl.com. That's securegl.com, or you can go to our website, which is www.securegl.com.
I'll let Mike take it because he's got the professional radio voice. We might have to hire you to come in and do the commercials for our show, because that was.
Hey, I can be had.
Yeah, that was really impressive. George, thank you so much for joining us today. Really appreciate it. And guys, and for our audience, if you want to get connected to these gentlemen, reach out, follow their story on LinkedIn. Mike's very active on there. He shows a lot of great leadership insight and value. SecureGlobal Logistics. At the same time, if there's anybody in the space that we really should hear from, feel free to reach out to me. through LinkedIn, or my co-host, his name's Clint Aiken. You know him on, if you follow me, you're probably following him on LinkedIn as well. That being said, again, to our audience and our stakeholders, we are a third-party advocate for the region. So we want to serve and support business owners like these gentlemen, the people that they serve, the communities that we serve. It really is centered around how do we help get out there and tell the story for the work that's being done here in the Houston region. We live in one of the best places, the best ports, the best opportunistic places in the world. And we're very thankful and humble to be a part of that. So thank you for tuning in. You can reach out to me on LinkedIn. You can follow us at the Gulf Coast Growth Show LinkedIn page, or the Economic Alliance Houston Port Region LinkedIn page. Subscribe to our channels, and we look forward to seeing you guys on the next week episode. Have a good day.